Pete, just getting the kindness out of my heart after being in court all morning.
Oh, geez. So it's Friday, June
27th.
27th. I lost a whole day. June 27th. And Pete spent the morning in Spokane. Not Spokane, Spokane. Beautiful city up there. What were you doing up there, Pete?
Well, I got to say, the courthouse is beautiful, man. If you haven't been up there, it is a gorgeous courthouse. At least, the interior, the exterior, the interior is fine. I was up there, and thanks to our wonderful co-counsel, Marshall Casey, who's been working the Sean Foyt case against the city of Spokane. For anyone that's kind of late tuning in, that's the one where Mr. Foyt came up. He prayed for then Mayor Nadine Woodward. He preached in an open invite. There was this publicly advertised event. It was going to be at a park, but because the fires were raging at the time, it got moved indoors. And so as he's praying, the city of Spokane decided to adopt a resolution saying, oh, your anti-LGBTQ extremism isn't welcome here. And some of the city council members are specifically on record saying that they wanted to make sure that it's known that that's not welcome in Spokane. And so we sued them for his First Amendment, his establishment clause, which is his free exercise, his ability to exercise his religion, and his free speech rights. The city, through their attorneys, brought a motion to dismiss a few months ago, and we had a hearing on that. The judge is what's called taking it under advisement, so she's reading or has read the briefs and thinking about the oral arguments and doing her research on the case law that we presented to make sure we presented it clearly and accurately. Same thing with opposing counsel. And then she's going to make a decision. And she was very clear this morning that by law, I have up to 90 days. I don't intend to extend it that far, but I don't expect something next week, which, I wouldn't either, because it's a week from today is Independence Day. And she should be celebrating that with her family.
Oh, Independence Day, 4th of July. Typically, as an organization, we take that as a holiday for all of us to kind of relax and just spend time with family. But this year we're really focused on that because of some of the work that we're doing, especially with religious freedom being one of those and one of the founding tenets of this country, and obviously so because it was put into the Constitution. It's just such a great holiday to remember that, and sometimes I think that we don't take enough time to really remember what it is we're celebrating on that holiday. We just want to barbecue and time with friends and some fireworks, and then we go back to our lives.
Yeah, I think that's the unfortunate kind of run-of-the-mill life that we have because things have moved so quickly, especially with the advent of technology. You're never really untethered. It's hard to do that. My goal is for this upcoming 4th of July and the week after to actually untether. We'll see how successful that is. But to me, it's the opportunity to have a bit of a rebirth, right? Mm-hmm. It's pretty crazy that next year's the 250th birthday of the United States of America. And wow. So we're at 249 and it's a pretty exciting time. Hopefully this can really be a moving, maybe even almost a spiritual rebirth for the nation. To your point, religious freedom being one of the base and core tenets, the purposes of this country. That's why we took that Foyt case. That's why we don't want a city to come in and say your religion, your viewpoint, your basis for preaching Christ's word, whether Pete Serrano agrees with it or not, or the city councilors up in Spokane agree with it or not. It's not the city of Spokane and the council members in their official capacities duty to say which religion is okay and which is not. And we even talked about that in our briefing on Foyt, and it's really this notion of, hey, look, you want to paint your crosswalks and say, yay, Pride Day. That's one thing for you to speak as an organization, but to say, no, not that guy, not his beliefs, that is so anti-American, so anti-constitutional, that again, I know I started this with the rebirth of America, that hopefully maybe this next year becomes that rebirth where a lot of us who've kind of dug our heels in over the past 5 or 10 years and fought are not only successful, but can really be rejuvenated, with that huge looming 250th birthday.
I hope so. I hope we're heading in the right direction, and I think there's pockets of the country that are waking up to it and are heading in the right direction. And there's pockets that are just holding fast to that direction of just bleak and utter failure. One of those pockets being our southern neighbor, Oregon, just wants to copy everything we're doing here in Washington, and California almost in lockstep as well. But today we found out in Oregon they're passing up their own flavor of the mag ban that we're trying to fight against so valiantly.
Yeah, well, and that's so problematic for so many different reasons. One, you and I were talking about this. A lot of folks will say, well, I'll just skirt the mag ban here in Washington by going to Idaho or Oregon. Well, one, maybe shocking news to some, when you're taking a banned item from one state to an item into which it's banned, that's importation, which is prohibited. And look, I'm not going to check your baggage or your luggage or the hood of your car or whatever. And quite frankly, I don't think the police should, but that is technically in violation of Senate Bill 5078, the mag ban. But equally importantly, that closes one of the two borders that were potentially porous, and doesn't allow for folks to go down south and then bring them up north. And so, yeah, it becomes problematic for so many reasons, and notwithstanding the fact that it was technically illegal from day one.
Right. Yeah, it's just one of the things we had a 2A forum a few months ago where we talked about that, and there was a couple of gentlemen that mentioned, we'll just go do our own thing, right? We're just going to do it. The thing about going around a law or skirting a law or just saying, I'm not going to follow it, is that, well, that's great for you maybe in your situation, but it's not always going to be that easy for you to skirt that law. And if we don't do something legally and binding to stop these laws from being enacted and going forward, eventually that noose can get tighter and tighter and tighter, and you're just going to be hanging there without an option for anything and no way to protect yourself.
Well, and we've always said this, go ahead, and if you put the noose around your neck, you're going to get caught. Mm-hmm. But we got to stand together. We got to find a way to fight together. We got to find a way to unite, to do the right things, to achieve the ultimate goal, the global mission. I mean, that's why we have constantly looked to expand our footprint in getting people who support and, stand alongside us. That way, is going back to the COVID and the school districts. How easy was it for Chris Reichdahl to play whack-a-mole with 5 or 6 out of the hundreds of school districts and say, hey, we're going to punish you, withhold your money. We're going to punish you, withhold your money. Had everyone stood against him, it would have been like, now what are you going to do? You're just going to pocket it all to OSPI for nothing, right, and not disseminate or distribute it?
Well, I mean, you brought up the good point, and I think that's a good analogy. They can hang one of us individually, each, one at a time. But if we all stood up, there's not enough rope in the country to stop us from doing what we got to do and to stop us from standing up for our rights and defending them. But the but is that we have to do it, and we have to do it in a concerted effort, and we have to do it together. And that's really what we've been trying to accomplish in the last few months, is bringing all the 2A organizations and all the people that support Second Amendment and or freedoms in general, the Constitution generally in Washington, together to support these causes and to understand. And we're trying to make it as clear as possible what our game plan is and where we're going with our Gators gun case, which is headed toward the Supreme Court of the United States. And if you're not familiar with that, that is specifically it's specifically about the gun ban or the mag ban here in Washington, and we're defending Wally Wentz and his FFL, his store, who was accused of selling those contrary to the law that went into Senate Bill 5078. We are taking that to SCOTUS because we believe we have something a little bit different than anybody else. What do you want to maybe highlight that again?
Yeah, and I mean, talk about perfect relevance. So, one of the opposing counsel in the Foyt case is also on behalf of Alliance for Gun Responsibility, fighting both our assault weapons ban, air quotes, and our large capacity magazine, air quotes there, cases being Gators Guns. And so when I talked to him this morning, his comment was, I said, hey, look, obviously we're appealing this to the U.S. Supreme Court. We're seeking writ. And his first comment was, well, with it coming out of the state Supreme Court, don't you think that weakens the case? I said, it's the only one of its kind. I think it actually strengthens it. I said, this isn't a potential split between circuits. This is a final stop has said this is the case. And guess what? And I know he didn't like this. Said they misinterpreted what the Supreme Court told them to do. And so, look, if your kid's the last stop and your kids are always wrong, I'm not your kids, mine maybe. But if your kids are the last stop and they're not doing what you're supposed to do, guess what? Mom and dad step in.
Right.
And that's why we think that we can be successful with Gators on our petition for review. Our writ for certiorari is what it's called. And that'll be due late July, early August. And I've been working that, as on and off for the past couple weeks. And, it's weird. It's a different process because you're basically, instead of arguing I should win this, you're arguing you should review this. And you're explaining the errors below and why those merit the Supreme Court's attention. And I do think we have a very clear path. And it's, again, the fact that this is coming from a state Supreme Court that just abjectly ignored what the U.S. Supreme Court said in Bruin, in Heller, in Rahimi, and everything in between all those. I think that the Supreme Court, if they've not gotten enough frustration, remember, we don't have to have a 5. You got to have a majority to win the case on the merits, but you got to have 4 to take it from a writ. So, you can assume Thomas and Alito are chomping at it. Mm-hmm. Kavanaugh wrote about the AR ban that, he thinks that it's going to come forward in the next couple terms. That could be fall, spring, or summer of 26.
Right.
And we saw a plethora. We had, today was the last day for the Supreme Court to issue their opinions from the last term. And so we had like 6 come out this morning, and we're seeing these very staunch, like 6-3, it's called the conservative slate versus the liberal slate. Like, no, it's constitutional slate versus the anti-constitutional slate.
No, truly.
But long and short is I think those are the reasons why this case not only matters, but this case actually gets the traction. Because I can imagine a couple of the justices, even those who may not side with us, in the end may say, hey, you know what? It's really important that we really set the record straight of when we speak, we expect the lower courts to listen. And while, we kind of really can puppeteer things with the district and appellate courts, we really need to put our stamp of finality on a state Supreme Court that's going rogue. And that's really, to me, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, I agree. And on top of that, we have another case, to your point about the assault weapons, what Kavanaugh wants to see. He wants to see a case that includes the assault weapons, and I think they want a very clean and clear-cut one. And we do have one. We have Guardian Arms that we have coming up through the state courts. How are we trying to position those two cases together to get the ultimate win there?
Well, I think, Guardian Arms, more than anything, gets to pivot really well off of Gators' decision out of the state Supreme Court. And the Gators' decision was very clear on really trying to define and, in my opinion, redefine arms. And because of the way it handled, again, Heller, Bruin, Rahimi, and everything else, I think that the way that arms were discussed in the majority opinion and then the dissent kind of really hammered and railed against them. And then you take Basher's opinion about what constitutes arms and the kind of ignorance or the dismissal of his opinion from the state Supreme Court. I think you add that up, and Gators was a gift to Guardian Arms because, fine, you want to declare a magazine not an arm because it doesn't cast, a bullet. Tell me, of the plethora of the list of the 50 particular firearms and the pieces that are so integral that were banned and prohibited under 1240, the so-called assault weapons ban, tell me how you can reconcile the determination that a magazine is an arms with all that stuff that's prohibited. You're not going to be able to. And so I think that Gators was a huge gift to us and the firearms community for the assault weapons question. And I think as we push that forward, again, it's going to be more heat on the seat. And hopefully the Supreme Court, as they look at the way we tee up Gators, as they take that, the U.S. Supreme Court, then we can move those forward simultaneously, hopefully.
Right. I mean, and if anyone's not following along, in layman's terms, what the state Supreme Court has done is kind of painted themselves in a corner, defining what an arm is with our Gators case, and then that law itself defining an arm. And so if an arm is something that is protected by the Second Amendment and the Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington Constitution, therefore the assault weapons cannot be banned because they are protected under those definitions.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, those definitions have to be coextensive and they have to work well together. And I don't think that they are coextensive. One of the interesting things is, you know, the state falls back on in use for self-defense, which we know is a misnomer from the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. The Washington State Supreme Court has utilized that previously, and that's what we're really trying to reconcile with Gators is, hey, the Washington Supreme Court says the term arms is coextensive. In other words, it's the same under the Second Amendment or the Washington Constitution. On top of that, the U.S. Constitution is the floor. So how are you going to tell me that only for self-defense can really apply if the floor says for any lawful purpose? So again, we're trying to really pit Gators against both itself and against kind of guardian arms. I mean, I usually don't talk as openly about this while we have ongoing litigation because we don't know who's watching. But when I think the reality is when you look at the way the opinion's written, you know, without trying to give our hand too far away, I think that's to me, those are the ways we get home on both of these.
Right.
And I mean, obviously you can tell it excites me. It excites me that we can actually have some wins, not only out of the state of Washington, but potentially out of the U.S. Supreme Court. Because we need them. That's really what it boils down to. The people of Washington, the people of the United States of America deserve and need to have their rights protected.
For sure. So I invited people on Facebook Live to comment or ask questions live as we're going through. We got a question from Mike. He says, have there been unlawful arrests in Washington State regarding these toxic laws? Is there law enforcement in Washington State ignoring these breaches of 2A rights? Thank you. So that's two questions. Have there been unlawful arrests in Washington State regarding these laws?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, these laws primarily are financial,
right?
You know, so they don't result in jail time. At least not typically. Obviously, we worked the Federal Way case for a while, and they ended up paying a fine.
So the way that the way that I understand these laws and how they've been so successful is that they've not written them for the general public per se. They've written them specifically against FFLs or you know, people who sell firearms legally. They've written them so that they have to comply with these laws, which therefore make us then comply because they have to defend or ensure that they're able to keep their license. So their livelihood and their license to sell is at risk if they are to be in contrary to these laws. Whereas the average citizen, if we had these items purchased before, we're grandfathered with these items. We just can no longer purchase them.
Right. And that's exactly it. They bind up the selling public in a way that you and I no longer can exercise that same right. I mean, it's a de facto loss of rights, and it's not even really de facto. It's a loss of rights to the citizen because we cannot procure those items.
Right.
And, the state kind of falls back on that. Oh, it's not really infringing your rights. It's just limiting, commerce. And it's like, nah, it's not limiting commerce. It's limiting availability of firearms that are lawful.
Right. Well, it seems that this is their playbook and has been for the last 5 years. And it was very, very obvious. Probably before that, but it's become so obvious starting in 2020, where it wasn't the citizen that was getting arrested for not wearing a mask. It was the business owner that was getting fined for not forcing the citizen to wear a mask. And it's the same playbook. It's that we're gonna issue these licenses, but we're going to hold them hostage if you don't do exactly what we say.
Yeah. Well, before we pivot off that, that reminds me. We were talking yesterday about a case that came out of the Court of Appeals, which was we took the Spanaway Fitness case, which was a gym and the whole mask issue, and they pivoted and went into a health facility, which was allowable, but a gym wasn't, right? And, you know, there was litigation that we worked on behalf of Spanaway Fitness and their owner, and we ended up settling that case, settling it at, you know, I think a true reasonable settlement would be $0, but let's be honest, state of Washington, you're not going to get away with it at $0. Well, fast forward to, I think it was yesterday or Wednesday, we got an opinion out of the State Court of Appeals, I think Division 3 here. There was an Anytime Fitness, I believe in Yakima, that did the same thing. And there was a whole question of whether or not the agents were tailgating. In other words, like you jump in and then I'm the agent and I just sneak in behind you, whether they had lawful entry to conduct a search for the COVID mask protocol issues. The business owner ended up winning that on appeal. And so here we are, we were able to successfully settle where our client was happy with that number, 2.5, 3 years ago.
Right.
Anytime Fitness is just now wrapping up at the Court of Appeals, and who knows, the state could still appeal that to the Washington State Supreme Court. So, you know, it's sometimes people ask us, well, why do you settle that? Why do you do this? You know, your goal is to make precedent. And absolutely, our goal is to make precedent, but sometimes there's a business decision that works with our mission and it works with our clients' needs, and we find a middle way out. And, you know, it's funny because Spanaway was a great case. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with a business owner, but I kind of put that on the shelf. And then seeing that yesterday, it's like, holy cow, we could have been in litigation this long or even longer with the very similar result.
Right. Well, just considering the time and the resources and ultimately the dollar amount that would have cost to get to that point, it far exceeds what Spanaway ended up actually settling for. And so, to your point, it really made more sense in that particular case to do what they did. We're grateful that someone like Anytime Fitness is willing to go the distance with that, you know, and set that precedent and do that. But in that instance, it was better off for everybody to just settle that and be done with it. His other question was, is law enforcement in Washington ignoring these breaches of 2A rights? Law enforcement, unfortunately, they can be against these laws, and multiple sheriffs in Washington have stated they will not enforce any anti-2A laws. But it's not up to them about who enforces this against those FFLs. The state can bring case against them like they did in Gators without having to bring law enforcement into it. They can bring them bring charges against them without having to get a sheriff or a police chief involved. And so it doesn't matter whether law enforcement wants to, and many sheriffs have even stated they're against the permit to purchase that was just passed that goes into effect in 2027. Unfortunately, it's not up to them to enforce that. That's actually a state issue to enforce. And so we do have some great law enforcement that are very 2A and constitutionally minded. The playbook just doesn't involve them.
Yeah, and to that point, I've had some conversations with sheriffs who are like, yeah, you know, I can either vocally oppose it and say I'm not going to enforce it, or I can, guess what, just not enforce it. And which one puts my neck out there further and makes me a target so that my books get checked, right? Look, I'm not saying there's a right way or a wrong way. I personally, it's nice to have other folks that are vocal because, to your point about the rope gets stretched further and further. But if at the same time I know I can go to county A, B, or C, and, you know, sheriff's going to be like, not my problem.
Right.
Go ahead, WSP, figure out how you're going to put your resources down here and deal with it. Well, maybe things are okay, you know? And to that same point, I've had some of the sheriffs talk about some of the other concerns they have that aren't, you know, overtly in the legislation, like some of the registry issues and that sort of stuff. And so we have friends in law enforcement that maybe aren't as outspoken as sometimes we'd like them to be because they are autonomously elected, although King County moved its charter to an appointed sheriff. So there's always that concern too, that legislation could, and there was legislation that died, but remember, it's a biennial session. So next year there's a half resurrected bill about moving sheriffs to appointed officials. As we look at that, now a sheriff really can't stick his neck out or her neck out. So, I get it. People would like those cheerleaders that are out there stomping feet saying, I'm going to, I'm not going to. To your point, the sheriffs really aren't the place to arrest the lawmakers for violating our rights. You have a whole kind of expose or an article that you have been teasing out that at some point will get out there, which is largely the legislature is immune from civil and criminal offenses. I'll summarize the whole thing in that statement. And it sucks. It really, really sucks. But that's the way it's been set up. It's the way that sadly it's been expanded, the protections. Personally, I don't think that, legislature should be on the hook for penalties except for very gross violations, which we know they are doing.
Right.
So anyway, that's probably a whole nother podcast.
But there is a caveat there, and it actually fits really well with a question we got from Tanya. She says, when will the federal wrecking ball arrive to Washington State? She's asking for lots of friends. So there is that one caveat where we do have one recourse, or one course of action is if the federal government, in the form of a U.S. attorney, comes in and brings suit against these legislators.
Yeah, and I'd love to see that. And, Tanya, if you've got friends in D.C. that need to come out here, I got a spare room, right? Like they can hang at my house and I can sit down and give them where all the bodies are buried that we've experienced over the past 4 years of violation of our rights that we've been around. I can't tell you when, where, or how they're going to arrive, but God willing, the cavalry arrives. And when it arrives, it's going to be brutal for people that they just think they're going to get away with being Chris Reichdahl or Bob Ferguson.
Right.
Not to name anyone.
No, but we will point fingers if we get somebody from Washington that needs some help.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm extremely hopeful that they will arrive and that they'll bring the support and they'll actually be, I did see that, Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon does the Civil Rights Division. She leads the Civil Rights Division. She's been in a lot of stuff. We saw that, I think it was her group filed an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court in the Rolovich case, which, I have my own opinions on that one. But the one that I thought was exciting was I saw they actually filed a lawsuit in one of the Southern California counties about voters and voter registration. To me, that's where I'm starting to say, oh, they're not just doing Twitter lawfare.
Right.
I mean, and I know that sounds very disparaging, but it's like filing a certain brief at a certain place and a certain time doesn't really move the needle, but it looks great on X and on other social media platforms. But filing, affirmative litigation saying, county, you're going to fix this or else, that to me, like now I'm paying attention. Right. So whether or not they're going to land here in Washington or how soon that'll be, I can't, I don't have a crystal ball, but hopefully our goal is to continually kind of mention them and get our voice out there, and anyone else that has a voice that can be amplified, please do that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the Rolovich case. He was the head football coach at Washington State University. It relates to one of our cases, which we're defending Dr. Renata Moon, who lost her job at Washington State University for simply stating the facts. And we're watching that, and we're talking about the federal government. We're seeing the federal government make some changes and make some moves that I think that are positive for our case and for what we're trying to accomplish here in Washington in defending people. So we have listed. We want to talk a little bit about our medical freedom, where things stand. We've got, I mentioned Dr. Moon, we've got Dr. Wilkinson, and Dr. Cole, who all are kind of outstanding out there. We're working on it and pushing the medical freedom. Where do we stand with those cases?
Yeah, so with the Moon case, the state filed a motion to dismiss. I mean, it's called a motion for judgment on the pleadings, but more of a technicality. It's really a motion to dismiss the case, saying some of the claims that we filed, or at least some of the claims that are so-called time barred. You have a 3-year statute of limitations, some preceded. A lot of those facts are in there to really give the background of what really happened, which was when she went out and spoke before Senator Ron Johnson, and then her contract was not renewed. And so, that case, they're seeking to dismiss it based on the time issue. I don't see a world in which that's granted. We're going to focus in on where all the facts that really led into her discipline was, or where her discipline occurred. And that was clearly within the time frame. And so I'm not, I always hate to, I want to couch this. I'm not super concerned about that. There is risk that the judge could disagree with us. We've seen that before, and say, oh, well, these very first issues that were outside the 3-year statute of limitations, the judge could decide that was really the determining factor. Again, the non-renewal really didn't happen until she spoke at the Ron Johnson hearing, which is clearly within the 3-year window. So even if some of the ancillary claims get dismissed, I believe that case will continue forward. And so that's Moon, and we're working on that. We have to file a response to that motion just the week after 4th of July. As far as Wilkinson, that case we argued that in early January, so it's coming up on 5.5 months before the State Court of Appeals. Hopefully we'll find that they determine that the medical commission didn't really utilize evidence or proper procedures to punish him and then, seek to take his license or at least suspend it. And so if we're successful there, it's going to be really interesting to see how that unwinds everything that's been done. And some of the stuff can't be undone. They sent him down to a PACE assessment, which is a clinician type assessment program in San Diego, which, most people want to visit San Diego, but I wouldn't for that purpose. So anyway, it's that case. We really need that decision because that'll really spur on how we want to approach it. Obviously, I think if we're successful, and I do think the judges it sounded like 2 of the 3 judges may have been inclined to listen to us. Certainly they listened to us and they may have even sympathized with us. And if that's the case, the state's going to have to decide what it wants to do with these medical freedom issues, because if that one's unwound at the appellate court and they don't appeal it to the Supreme Court, then, that's going to really lead the way for the Coles of the world. And we do have a hearing on his license in Seattle on like the 16th of July, It's mid-month. So, those cases are still winding their way through. Litigation takes a while. And, we were fortunate with Gators that people are like, oh, 2 years is forever. It's like 2 years is very quick in litigation, especially when you're talking about having a decision from a Supreme Court within that 2-year window.
Right.
So, those cases are winding a little bit behind it, but, they're moving forward.
Yeah. No, and just federally, I'm excited about what's going on. RFK is really delivering on some of the things that he promised he would do, that he would look at. ACIP, which is the board that ultimately decides what vaccines are required or how they're required or what's going on, has been completely turned on its head. And we're seeing some good stuff coming out of that as far as informed consent and medical freedom go. So very excited about that. And that's really where we're seeing that federal wrecking ball starting there in D.C., and it's going to continue to roll downhill and eventually get to Washington, as long as our legislators and elected officials don't continue to rail against the machine as they continue to do, which is another point that I wanted to talk about. Is with executive orders, it's interesting. When the executive orders were politically in their favor, they were all about, oh, this is mandated, this is law, you have to follow them. Mr. Chris Reckdahl seems to think that executive orders aren't really law, aren't really important to follow.
Well, nothing except for what Chris says is important to Chris, right? Let's be honest. We see the litigation that folks think could lead to his potential recall, which is litigation apparently. And again, I haven't followed it closely, so I hope I don't misstate the facts. There's a woman that I believe worked for him, did something like voted with the school board to ban transgender athletes, forcing them to participate in their sex at birth. And, then he fires her. Mm-hmm. And, that lawsuit's ongoing. Again, that's how I believe the case is aligned. I could be wrong. to your point, if he's really taking some negative action for someone following the federal law, Title IX, executive order, but violating the state law, it's classic Reichdahl, my way or the highway. I will, when I can cheerlead, I'll cheerlead. Otherwise, I will rule with an iron fist.
Right.
That guy's such a piece of junk, man. I'm just going to say it.
Well, this is the thing, is that the very thing that our school districts are hurting for right now is funding. We can talk about how they've been, misused funds and not very good stewards of the budgets that they've had. But that's really where a lot of the angst and worry comes from for our schools right now. And that's what he is continually threatening to take away, is any funding for those schools. And it just compounds on the problems that we already have.
Well, and speaking of compounding, we have a budget that's allegedly upside down, working in the red, to the tune of billions. And of course, more taxes doesn't fix that. But the Democrats certainly believe that's the case. So they tax the crap out of us and still find a way to write a deficit in. And he's out there banging the drum of, to your point, I'm going to withhold this funding for these ones. I don't really care if Trump's the bad guy. He can withhold federal funds, and you're going to be paying for that. God forbid it ever cut against him. And it's so interesting that the school budget still wanted to be increased, and he's still trying to find a way around that and trying to get his way back to square one. And Ferguson's out there touting like a $700 million budget deficit. And again, same thing. What's the problem? Medicare, Medicaid payments aren't coming through from the feds. Well, if I understand correctly, over the past few years, our Medicare and Medicaid recipients who are not citizens of our state, of our country, here in the state of Washington, are putting a significant burden on those dollars.
Right.
Now, you can be a good neighbor all you want, but you can't tell me the problem is Donald Trump when the state has actually set up a way to work a deficit. And now the feds are like, screw you. We're not giving you what you want.
Right.
And it is such a speak in one cheek and hold your tongue in the other cheek. Those two are ridiculous. What's crazy, though, is there enough people or cheated votes in Washington that they stay in power?
Yeah. Well, it is insane. It's crazy. But it kind of makes sense because, we live in a state right now where we have, a drug crisis or a fentanyl crisis. And the drug of choice of our legislators is the tax dollar. Mm-hmm. And they can't get enough. And they've got to find ways to get more and more and more. And they figured the system out. They figured, we can let the wildlands go, and then we'll get fires, so we get money from fires. We're going to beg the government for any kind of emergency funds we can. We had a bomb cyclone come through. We're going to milk them for that. And then when they don't give it to us, we're going to stomp our feet and cry and say, they didn't give us the money that we need. When we should have had a surplus to be able to take care of that. Washington should be able to take care of Washington.
Yeah, until you run the businesses out because you suck at, actually being a business-friendly state, and your intent is to tax the hell out of all businesses, small, medium, and large. I mean, it's a terrifying revenue forecast. If the Democrats continue to be so tax-heavy, we're screwed. The state, we've lost a significant portion of Boeing. I'm concerned about what's happening. I mean, like Moses Lake, where you're from, they've got some phenomenal assets there, but how long are people going to want to be there? Mm-hmm. And then, what do you have left? Like the Hanfords of the world? At some point, what if, the feds say, screw it, we don't need to clean it up, grout it and be done in 4 years, not 61 years. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot at risk here of bad policymakers making bad policy and even worse spending choices. I had a different point, but sorry.
It's hard not to go, and I think we practice restraint in this podcast from going off into the weeds and all the things that we see wrong with what's going on. We try and stay focused on what it is that we are specifically doing, right? Because we can rail and talk and whine all we want, and that's really what anybody has ever done. We're focused on taking action and what's actionable here. And that's really what we're working on. And you had something else that came through today.
Well, and so just one other thing is the reason I railed on that is you mentioned the bomb cyclone, and people are blaming the Trump people. Bob Ferguson is blaming the Trump administration. My understanding was the first denial came through the Biden administration. Now, because it's been appealed for that FEMA money, that now it's Trump's fault. Well, listen, man, Nick Brown just tweeted out earlier that as far as the birthright citizenship, which we did help Amicus folks participate, which it looks like the Supreme Court said at a minimum, the nationwide injunction doesn't stay. Whether or not I don't think they've decided the question. They may have by now, because I understand some of the opinion was kind of leaked a little bit, and there may have been a further, cadence of the opinion that was going to get read in to the record. I don't know if that happened. Again, I was driving a lot. But he talked about their win at the trial court. Yeah, we won at the trial court. Disappointing SCOTUS. No, screw you, man. We won at the trial court with Gators, and shitty decision and I'll just say it for what it's worth. Fine. And go ahead and FCC me there. Out of the state Supreme Court, it is what it is. It's frustrating, and they're taking their lumps and they don't understand how to live with them. And I'm okay railing with them railing against them and having this kind of, verbal vent of mine. Cause we have spent hours upon hours in our blood and our sweat, and I've yet to cry. So no tears yet. In defense of the people of Washington, when these pricks their single job is to uphold the Constitution, and they violate our rights day in and day out and blame it on someone else, and they spend and spend and spend, and they make our way of life so much more difficult. Leave us the hell alone, and we'll be okay.
All right. Stop taxing us. Oh, by the way, happy 4th of July. We're going to tax you some more on your gas while you drive
right,
wherever you're going. 6 more cents starting next week. I hope everybody's excited about that. Not to mention, I've been seeing a lot of posts about the registration fees, especially in the Puget Sound area. Apparently, they've got the worst of it over there. I've seen people $1,100, $1,300 to register their vehicles over there.
Holy cow.
Yeah. We're getting up closer to the $100, $150, $200 over here, and that's ridiculous how much it's costing us to register when it should be the $30 that we all voted for.
Yeah, and you get unelected bureaucrats or appointed then elected bureaucrats to make decisions. It's pretty disappointing, and I know you wanted to shift off of my frustrations.
Well, no, we're fine. I think we've covered just about everything, unless you wanted to go into the LCYC appeal.
Yeah, just the one last thing. Everyone remembers the Parents' Bill of Rights, which not surprisingly was successful as an initiative, then successful as legislation that came from an initiative, and then got appealed, and then this year legislature overturned that. So we had the success alongside the state defending that first Parents' Bill of Rights, the real Parents' Bill of Rights, not the undoing of that. And that was in King County Superior Court, and finally LCYC, the group that opposed the original Parents' Bill of Rights, has finally appealed the case in state appellate court. So that's briefing that's being conducted this summer as well over the next few weeks. So we're going to have a lot that's moving that's critical. And now I know a lot of folks are like, well, the legislation undid most of it. And it's like, okay, that's true. But whatever wasn't undone, we can still salvage. And so let's not forget that. The time and the effort that we're going to put in is going to be worth salvaging those pieces that are left. And also it's going to be important to have a court of law say, this is or isn't how the law should work. This is or isn't how legislation should work. There was a whole question about single subject and where it was appropriate. So there's a lot of the contours of legislation that can, and the parameters defined as we litigate this case. There's the whole mature minor doctrine, which is an outstanding issue that we raised. So there's a lot of meat left on this bone, and why we are staying in this appeal. Mm-hmm. And again, I received it as I was driving, so I haven't read their brief, but I can imagine what it says. And it's a fight that we're going to stay in. So, we got a crazy summer. It's really 2A heavy, obviously, with Gators going to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then God willing, they actually take it. And over the fall and spring, we're briefing it on the merits and trying to fire up Guardian Arms. But we also have real critical issues, parental bill of rights and family rights, bringing those to the forefront and staying in that. We've got other voter rights issues that are percolating as well. I mean, there's just so much that we continue to do because, again, those who are elected aren't doing it, and someone has to step in, and that's us.
Right. And that's really, I mean, I wanted to close it by summarizing our work, right? I mean, you hit on all the topics that we're really working on. I mean, you didn't mention the medical freedom with the docs that we're representing as well, but we are that groundswell of what we need to do to oppose those that are in power that are trying to take our rights from us. And it's only through us, we the people, that we're going to make a change. We've talked a lot about the federal government and what they're doing. They're doing great work, but it's not going to affect us if we don't make the change and we don't support them in what they're trying to do, and we don't do it here locally. We have to get together, we have to organize, and we have to continue to push. We have to let our friends and neighbors know, hey, there's this organization called Silent Majority Foundation. Guess what they're doing? These are the things that they're standing for. These are the fights that they have for us. Is there one that you're interested in? Help support them, Unfortunately, we have to ask for donations. Money is what makes the world go around, and we're fighting against an unlimited supply of our tax dollars. So we're doing it with extremely thin margins and doing it as cheaply and most affordable way that you can fight for your rights without having to get your own personal attorney is to join with us and become a member and or a monthly donor and fight for your rights.
Absolutely. I mean, that is what we stand for, and we have to be yoked with our folks and have to have that financial support, or we can't do it. I mean, we have left a lot of money on the table where if we were doing this in a private firm, my house would be much bigger and much nicer. But that's not the point. The point is we do this on a shoestring budget so that we can put all efforts into protecting and preserving our rights. And if we're gone, there's not going to be another line of defense.
Yeah, I don't see one coming unless we, as a people, we the people, keep going.
Yeah, I'll move then. At that point, I will have I will have done my job and fought like hell in court. And if it comes to that, I'm not interested in that fight.
No, but our fight ultimately is for our children and for the future, and that's really what we want, is a better place for us to live and get back to. Well, thanks, Pete. Anything else? Any closing remarks? Anything you remind people of?
No, I mean, have a very safe and fun Independence Day. Remember what it means to be an American citizen, what it means to be, we mentioned birthright citizenship. Be grateful for your birthright to be a citizen of this nation. We have so many great things. I know sometimes we get into the negativity of what we experience, but we're at least fighting to preserve those rights. We're not fighting to create them. We're not fighting to figure out whether they exist. They exist. They're being violated, and we are trying to stand in that middle position to mediate, or not even mediate, just to recover our rights. And we're blessed to start from that premise. There's so many people that start from down here and like, what can I do? Like, right. We've got it. We're right. Blessed. We are a blessed nation.
Right. And we understand it is our duty to continue to fight for those rights, even though they are granted to us by God. It's our duty to continue to fight for them and stand for them. Well, thanks, Pete. This has been great. Thanks for listening. If you've listened all the way to the end, and we'll see you next time.